In this video, we will take a quick look at the process for importing a comma delimited file into the Excel program. Now, the specific steps may vary slightly depending on the version of Excel that is being used, as well as whether the software is being used on a Windows or Mac computer or system. In this instance, we are looking at the process that is used for Excel on a Mac operating system. To begin the process, we will locate the file menu, and we are actually importing a file because in this particular instance we do know that it is a comma separated file. If we were sent a file and we were unsure of the format, then we could still go under the import, but we might have to choose some different options. So we can go under the import, and we will be given a series of choices to identify the type of file that we are wanting to import. In this instance, we know that this is a comma separated file, and so we will leave that marked, and we can simply click import. We will now be asked to locate the file that contains our delimited data, and we can locate the NNAS subset 1 file that you may have downloaded already from the course. Select get data or open. We have identified this as a comma separated file, and so by default it has specified that this is a delimited data file versus something that is referred to as a fixed width data file. A fixed width data file is similar in nature to the delimited. The difference is, rather than using commas to separate fields, certain fields are designated to have a certain length, and so a fixed width situation would be one in which the first 4 characters of every line belong to cell number 1. The next 3 characters in the line belong to cell 2, and so we would actually have to specify which characters belong in each cell, and so that's the definition of a fixed width. And so again, one of the advantages, going back to an earlier discussion about using a delimiter such as a comma space, is that it does allow for variable width in terms of our responses. So we are working with a delimited file which is already identified, and notice at this point in our preview window there's no separation. Right now, in effect, the entire row of data is attempting to be placed in just one cell. And so as we progress, notice in our preview window we now begin to see columns, and if we were to scroll across these columns, we see how the yeses and nos are now being separated. We also have what we saw previously as that top row of wording is getting separated out and is becoming our questions and corresponding to our questions from the survey. Now, if we also notice at the top, we're asked to identify the type of delimiter that is being used, and because we identified this as a CSV file, obviously comma is going to be one of the default selections. It has also identified tab as a delimiter. In this case, we actually don't need the tab because we know this is specifically set up to use comma as a delimiter. So in the event that one of our responses actually had a tab embedded in it, it could actually pose a problem. So because we know our delimiter in this case is set to be a comma, we would actually want to unclick the tab just so that we did not get any unusual or stray type of responses that again might get uh, our columns out of alignment. Also notice in this particular box you have the tab space, comma, which were previously identified as the most common delimiters, but we also have a box for other. And in a previous discussion, it was mentioned that if you are going to have responses in your survey that either might contain commas, contain spaces, then those types of delimiters might not work. And so when you actually create the delimited file, you can specify what character to have inserted as the delimiter. And we mentioned you could have things like a hashtag or a percent sign. And so if that was indeed the type of delimiter that was used, we could actually select other and then enter the hashtag, and so therefore it would know as it scrolls through each line every time it approaches a hashtag that the following information will go into the next cell. Again, in our situation, we know it's a comma, so we'll leave that empty and we can simply click next. At this point, we could actually go in column by column and specify what type of information that we have contained within that column. For our purposes right now, the simplest choice is just to leave this as general data, because we can always work with it and specify a format later. And so we can select finish. We're going to be asked, where do we want the data to be inserted into our spreadsheet? Presumably we're working with a blank spreadsheet, so it will default to that sheet. It will begin in the upper right corner. If for some reason we had inadvertently started this process and we were working with an existing file and we were importing this, we could actually switch this and tell it to import this data into a new sheet, so we don't contaminate any data that was already on this first sheet in our workbook. The other item that we would want to look at is located under the properties menu, and in particular it is the item that is specified as adjust column width. Now this doesn't actually change any of our data, but what it will do is create a situation where it's much more difficult to view your data. And so we actually want to uncheck this. Everything else can remain the same. Click OK. We'll return to our final import dialog, and then simply click OK to have our data imported. And so again, what we've done is we've taken that data that was formatted just in that basic Word document with all these commas separating these yeses and nos, and now all of those yeses, nos, and poor, fair, and so on have now been separated out into their respective columns. Now, one final note before we finish this initial introduction to importing our data goes back to that option of adjusting the column width. If we had actually left that checked, then in effect what will happen is each of these columns will be adjusted so that whatever the largest value is will be visible. So for example, we can see in this top column, if we look up in the full bar, we know that the complete entry in that column is because I like helping other people. But we can see in the actual cell, we can only see part of that particular response. If we had left the column adjust checked, then what would happen was that column would get expanded so that you can see that entire response, since that's indeed the longest response. Of course, if we were to continue this with all of the other options, what we can see though is that the spreadsheet gets expanded, and so we see less and less of our yes, no's, and so forth. So in many ways, leaving the columns more compressed versus expanded is somewhat of a personal preference. But in a situation, for example, where you may have a data set that has some missing values in it and you want to get those removed, then being able to see as much as you can on one screen without having to scroll left and back will make things much quicker, much more efficient. So again, that is the impact of actually using that adjust column width. So at this point, we have our data into Excel. We could at this point come up and go ahead and save our data and save it in an Excel format, because once it's imported as a comma delimited file, we no longer need to work with that particular format. We can just leave the original raw data in that format. That's the way we received it. Now we want to actually save it. Go ahead and save it as an Excel format. There's no need for us to continue to save any updates or revisions that we've done to the data, any cleaning. There's no reason to save it back into that delimited format at this point. So like I say, we can do a save, and then that also gives us, because we're using a different format, also gives us a duplicate of the original data set.